started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Caroline Colas. I'm the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Today, at our Lunch and Learn series with the Whole Being Institute, we have the pleasure of welcoming Flavin on the call. She's going to talk about, her topic today is motherhood, an asset for leadership during COVID-19. During this pandemic, both working dads and moms are home 24/7, supporting kids who are also at home without schoolmates or playmates. Parents now add the roles of teacher, online coordinator, and family time management to their own remote work for full-time jobs. Since research shows that women still do a larger percentage of household management and child care in many families, the added stress for parents working from home, especially moms, is palatable. Learn how we can view motherhood as an asset for leadership. Flavin is the founder and CEO of Leader Mom, Whole Leader. She's going to join us for a lively conversation on how to navigate the current and future challenges of work and home life without sacrificing our well-being. She is a social scientist focused on research-based insights and practices for effective leadership, including seeing motherhood as an asset. And Leader Mom provides targeted counsel and connection for working mothers. She has over 25 years of experience in engagement, culture, leadership in the corporate, government, and nonprofit world, as well as experience in crisis response. In addition to a graduate degree in politics, survey research, Catherine holds a certificate in positive psychology from none other than the Whole Being Institute. Welcome to the call, Catherine. Thank you so much for being here. And I really enjoyed our little pre-game show, getting to know you a little bit, and you're calling in from Connecticut.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. And this is the longest I have gone in my career without being in New York. So this almost feels like a commute. So thank you for the invitation.
I'm looking at the quote behind you. What does it say? Be amazing and take bumps lightly.
That is our synthesis of pretty much the entirety of the Leader Mom research. So to your point on the resilience component of this, years ago, I had the privilege of learning to ski as a, once reasonably athletic adult, and was on the ski slopes in Taos. And I was skiing like this, where you're very conservatively inching across. And my ski instructor stopped me and he said, "You're missing the whole point of the journey." And he said, "In order to learn to ski well, you have to pick where you want to go, like really look and decide, enjoy the journey, and learn to take the bumps lightly so that your body doesn't seize at every thing." And I stopped and said, that is the entirety of the Leader Mom research. So to try to, be amazing, enjoy this journey, go for it, and also learn to, slip, fall, miss something, hit a mogul, get back up and go again and still enjoy it.
Wow. That sounds like a perfect opening to ask you, how did you get or come upon the Whole Being Institute and a certificate in positive psychology?
Very much in the way of study what you need kind of a piece. I started with, I was familiar with Tal Ben-Shahar's research as an academic and was really drawn to study him, and the fact that it was held at Kripalu with Megan and Maria turned out to be one of the major blessings, unexpected blessings of my life, because I went for the research and came out with the humanity. And so first went out as a student and then worked with Claremont University on some of the program evaluations, and then came back as a teaching assistant, and now feel like it's just part of the family.
It's been so much fun kind of talking to you a little bit about Leader Mom and also what you're going to talk about today. And one of the things that I was struck by is that whether you're a mom or not, what you're going to talk about regarding leadership is applicable to all of us. Do you want to kind of give us some context for why you have this particular focus and how it's both universal and specific?
That is probably the most important question for me at this moment in time. And I will tell you that as a leadership development consultant, grew up in a firm that is really if you know who Marshall Goldsmith is, Marshall started the firm that I was in, and this notion of performing as leaders, over the course of my life, it was so firmly connected to excellence and also often to exhaustion or to depletion and to a sense of this particular version of leadership is one that is only available to a certain segment of the population. And particularly people would say to me as I was having kids, oh, this would be great as long as you don't have kids. And I was like, wait, that's so really this notion of people would say it's impossible, right? So for women, there's the implicit association test out of Harvard and a multiple academic bias assessment that folks can take shows that there is a much stronger association of women with family than career. 86% of women and men have that association, and the reverse is also true, right? So this notion of gender bias, that there's a higher association of men with career than with family. And I believe that this notion of men are only their work or women are primarily their home has been something that theorists of all kinds have been going after to try to get to a fuller, less gendered notion of what it means to be human. So that's sort of my philosopher hat for it.
Yeah, so unpack that a little bit for me. What do you mean by when you were first talking about, certainly there's the gender bias, but how this leadership model was only available to someone if they weren't considering kids? Does that mean because they would be distracted, or just talk a little bit about that for a second so we understand where we're coming from a little bit, so the past and have we moved at all?
So let me make an example. This is not an atypical conversation that women in our network would hear. At some point they would say, you have a lot of leadership development as long as you subcontract childcare or you don't have kids. So the implicit thing behind that is you have to be on a train at 5 in.the.morning, or you need to be in the office all the time so that you won't be able to parent the way that you want to. And I think those assumptions are based on some very common notions of what it takes to lead, right? There is no work, I'm not a fan of the term work-life balance, but I've been told over the course of my life, there is no such thing as work-life balance. And so if you choose to be a high-end consultant, you just need to let that go. And we now think of it as work-life mojo, right? And the research increasingly shows that people who work and don't, work 18-hour days or don't sleep, they make terrible decisions, and they also think they're making good decisions. So that there's an alignment between our work and the quest for more gender equity, and also what it really means to be a limited, phenomenal human, in terms of what your brain needs to function at its best, which includes eating, moving, sleeping, and having restorative space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. It sort of flies in the face of what positive psychology is saying all along, which is that the science actually shows that you need to address the whole, right? The whole being,
Yes.
right? And hence the mission of the Whole Being Institute. So you have some slides for us. Do you want to jump into us and unpack this a little bit more?
Sure. So where I want to start with this is this COVID, to honor this crazy moment in history. And as I was preparing for this talk, I thought, I really believe that this is a moment where we could either propel ourselves forward or find ourselves slipping back when it comes to gender equity. Pre-COVID, we reached a milestone where women, the US Labor Department said women now make up more than 50% of the US workforce. In my own 20 plus years of consulting, organizations were taking much more seriously the gender gaps, right? So if, in terms of senior leadership, when people would look at slides like this one, for example, more organizations were saying, why are there not more women in senior or executive leadership, right? And in this moment of time with Black Lives Matter and more inclusion, we could really take this word women and replace it with many people, why are there not more women? Why are there not more women of color? Why are there not more men of color? Why are there not, right? And so this part of what happens for women in particular, when you look at this, what do you see? This notion that we start with a fairly equitable arrangement, and by the time we get to the top executive ranks, 78% male, 22% female.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely,
So,
yeah.
and why do you think that would be? Like, if you had to hypothesize why that number is falling off, maybe this is something for the chat. Like,
Yeah, actually, let's put that in the chat. You know, what are the reasons why these numbers level off as we go higher into management, right, and upper level management?
and so
And let's see what people say. You know, what they're. And we have someone, Janet, saying gender bias.
that's definitely part of it. If you ask people, right, if you're a manager and you're looking at these numbers and you're accountable for this, probably the single most common answer we get is people are having babies, right? And so there's a natural drop off. And what's interesting is that that is true to a certain extent, but it is not as true as we think it is, right? So if you ask women who are what we define as leader moms, high performers, highly engaged, who also have kids, they're leaving because they don't have a great boss, because they don't see career opportunity, because they're getting limited performance feedback or exposure, and then they're going somewhere else, right, for a different environment. So it is, there's a growing body of research that is showing that the reasons that we don't have more women in leadership are motherhood related bias and penalty. So it's one of the number one reasons, but it's not the manifestation of it that people think is just natural selection, right? Like, I'm having kids now, I'm leaving, so there's nothing I can do about it. What we're learning is there are things that people can do about it.
There's a few things in the chat. Paul says men don't speak this way very much anymore, but there is still that it's a woman's true place is barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. Men in business still think they are a threat. They don't want them there. Joanne says it's a lack of paid parental leave. Maura says women choose their children and family before promotion. Janet says it's perception of moms' lack of focus on work. And there's not asking for what they want by Sally Hagelson's work. So those were some of the comments we had in the chat.
Thank you, everybody, for those. And each of them represents like the tip of an iceberg, right? The first comment about where women belong, right? Like the notion of implicit bias is that most of us have a higher association of women with family than career. 86% of men and women both. So when the two things conflict, it's often that our brain says something silly like, I can't have it all. and so this notion of how we show up in that space. And I also do believe, I don't think I've ever said this out loud, but I think women can be confusing for managers. One of the leaders I work with has in a given year will have 5 to 10 women go out on maternity leave, and he cannot tell what's going to make them come back or not, right? So he said, as of now, we don't really know. And so part of our research was to begin to pull together high-performing women leaders who were admired. So this sample that is built on competence and contribution, and ask them, okay, what's it like to be you, right? We basically said, tell us about your life. What do you think? And tell us what helps you, what enables your performance. And so there are, one, just knowing that their story is different and actually asking people who live in that category, right? Again, at this moment in Black Lives Matter, part of what people are trying to do is elevate the voices of people who historically haven't been able to tell their own stories. And so our research, it actually stunned me what we found in this too. So let me begin to take you there. So some of this will be I don't know, predictable to you in some ways. Being a leader and a mom is challenging, right? Um, there's a fair amount of guilt, right? And that guilt is more often in the direction of family than in the direction of work, but both of those happen. Um, about 1 in 2 of the women on our panel who are already at fairly high levels, these are typically directors and above. We didn't just focus on C-suite, but on senior leaders, broadly defined. Um, 1 in 2 see gender equity in sight, which is you're either going to say it's terrific or lousy, depending on your view. And 80% of them, about 80%, work more than 45 hours a week. Um, and and so they're working, and they are also highly engaged as parents, so they're carrying these domestic responsibilities as well. But here's the part that stunned me. Um, and in some ways it makes sense to me because it's kind of the life that I have aspired, many of us aspire to. We want to have a full career and a full family life. These women, 8 in 10 of them in our research have said their lives net, not moment to moment, but net are close to ideal. 97% were satisfied with their families and their work. Nearly 9 in 10 are exceeding expectations at work. So they are finding ways to really kill it at work and also be present at home. So challenging some of the models of you need to give everything to work and not have dinner with your kids. They were able to do that. And 7 in 10 of them provide at least 50% of family income. So this idea of really contributing in meaningful ways. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about this part?
Yes, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your research. You know, so were you studying moms that were successful? Just can
So
you say that again?
So I am a bird watcher by hobby. And in a lot of ways, I think this was me as a researcher and a social scientist. The research originally came out of a coaching engagement, a woman named Sybil, who was a global epidemiologist in a pharmaceutical company, Asian American background, having her second kid. And she was saying, I am going to ruin my life or ruin my family. And I said, and then describing sort of the unique pressures of her family's culture around what it means to be a mother. And she was looking up in her organization and saying, there's nobody here that looks like me who understands this particular set of pressures. And there's no one woman that I can hook my faith to say, okay, if she can do it, I can do it, right? So in the bias literature, there's something about exemplars, right? Like being able to see these people is very important for the folks who are in underrepresented groups. And so I began to think she needs to meet Michelle. So Michelle DeTondo is on our board. She is the former head of HR for MGM Resorts International. She has 2 kids. Her husband's a principal. And then I started to think of other people she needs to meet. Alicia, Maria, like the list. And so we began thinking about in our client engagements, which were with companies like American Express or Pfizer or Goldman Sachs or Brigham and Women's, because we were doing executive development, I was able to basically go in with consultants and talent professionals and say, I found these people in our data sets who are exceptional as leaders, very highly rated on engagement surveys or 360 feedback, and also who in written comments are being called out as people they admire. And so we collected them, kind of like, rose-breasted grosbeak and a Blackburnian warbler, of just trying to notice these people, and then pulled this panel together, which has about 300 women on it, which is not big enough. We want it to really grow. But it's pretty exceptional given the criteria for these women, and began to just interview them and talk about what is it like to be you. And it's an extraordinarily different story. Instead of being you can't do it all, it becomes sure it's challenging and it is massively worth it. And the other piece that we'll get to is that there are also learnable skills in here.
It seems like you're challenging the narrative. We were
It,
talking earlier about the narrative, right? And I was even thinking about a career, highly successful career woman that I know. And what she had to get over was that she was going to be a different kind of mom than her mom. And what a mom looked like to her was, of course, understandably, what her
Mhm.
mother did. And she actually spends quite not that much time with her kids, but there it's quality
Yeah.
time. And her husband is the primary kind of,
Mhm.
you know, day-to-day
Yeah.
caregiver. But she's highly engaged. And she said one of the things that she had to get over was she had to write her own narrative of what motherhood meant to her.
It is, even this, hopefully the smile on my face is evident to the viewer. When this, I knew these women and I could see how highly regarded they are and how rich their lives were. And when the data came back, it knocked me off my feet, in part because it was so inconsistent with what I have been told my whole life. Like when I made partner, my neighbor put her hand on my shoulder. I was holding my son Jack, who was then, 4, and she tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Your mother thinks she can do it all." But her thing was basically, he's doomed to a life of misery because you're not going to be a good mom. Um, and we live in an era where our notion of motherhood is a little over the top. Like it's women now who work parent more than my stay-at-home mom did in the 70s. Like direct hand-to-hand parenting. It is.
Why is that? What do you
Um,
mean?
I don't actually know. I think, I grew up in a neighborhood where my mom would say, okay, go do your thing, right? But and we would run around and go to swim practice or whatever. But there was a less it just was a more laissez-faire model of parenting. And now I think the sense of being an ideal perfect parent, right? Positive psychology certainly disrupts the notion of perfection. And part of what the leader mom parents do is, instead of assuming all of these things about what being a mother requires, they begin to define what's actually important to me, and how am I going to show up. So very much like your friend, like, what does being a good mother look like for me? Like what do the people in my family, given my partner, spouse, significant other, or if I'm a single mom, what do they need from me as a parent? And that's a classic leadership question. Um,
We had a great question in the chat. If women, these amazing women, are exceeding expectations in work, why is the disparity so great at the top?
so I think there are a number of reasons for that. One is these women many of them are indeed in the top percentage, right? So Alicia Spearman's on our board. Uh, she's the CHRO and chief legal counsel for Quinnipiac University. She previously was at Electric Boat. So she is one of those people, right? And it's interesting, like they are amazing, but here on this slide, I'm talking about the life is amazing. These women are talented and focused, and they have developed a set of skills and a mindset that enables them to scale, right? As leaders and as parents, right? And in so many ways, these skills are consistent with general leadership skills, right? Like delegation is the top. Delegation, financial acumen, executive presence. Those are 3 things that every executive, male or female, who we work with works on. Those are things every leader mom who doesn't want to be doing laundry all day, every day, also works on, right? Like,
So let's say those again, and we can actually, maybe Phoebe can write them in
sure,
the chat.
delegation,
Delegation.
financial acumen, and executive presence. Um, so let me, so I want to hit one thing now that is different. So in our research, and this is something that I think we're looking at putting into our next study. What is the level of childcare responsibility? So in our first study, as an example, the mean percentage of childcare responsibility that our leader moms had was 51%. In this study that just came out, that was referenced in the New York Times last week, in married couples now in COVID, women typically provide 70% of the childcare. So one of the things that may differentiate our panelists is that they have a different level of support. The person that they have married or partnered with or whatever, that person is more highly engaged on the other side. And that's part of what is happening now with COVID is dads are engaging in different ways and seeing what it's like on the other side. And it's one of the things that I really hope continues.
So are you meaning to say that you're seeing dads more engaged or
Yeah,
less engaged? Oh, fantastic.
we are seeing with families at home, one, we're at a minimum, we're seeing dads who are also, if they're working at home, are able to go back to their work. They are more attuned to the daily pressures of childcare, which I think in many ways are often invisible. One of my colleagues is a guy named Rob Fazio, who is he specializes in resilience and performance psychology, and he's just a brilliant human. And he said one of the things that he has begun to realize as a privilege that he holds is that if he wants to go on a trip, he books his ticket and packs his bag. His wife, who also works with him and is a PhD, similarly, when she wants to go on a trip, she books her flight, packs her bag, cooks 3 meals, sets up childcare, makes sure that the guest room is made for the grandparents. And he said, I realized for every one thing that I do, my wife is probably doing 5. And so he's made a commitment to understand more what the things are that she's thinking about and ask, what can I do to help? And their particular arrangement is he now takes their daughter in the morning and the wife takes the daughter in the afternoon so that they both get dedicated time. So that kind of a story is more frequent, I think, and I hope it continues.
That's very encouraging and smart.
It makes a lot of sense. And I also think it's possible that as men go back to work, it will become a distant memory and it will be easy to fall back into the previous patterns. So this is one of those things around, I think for the people who are listening, whether you're a neighbor, a parent, a manager, or a grandparent, to just be more attuned to these invisible, emotional, domestic, mental burdens that women carry, and trying to be, like, if our research says anything, it's just ask rather than assume, right? What do you need? How can I be of support? Versus you're probably just going to cover all that.
Do you think that there's a bias there between men asking for what they need more often than women? And that might be part of the challenge there?
That is 100% true. So women in the social psychology literature, women consistently underestimate their contributions and men more consistently self-promote. So there's something called the male hubris, female humility divide. And I can see it in the folks who are visible, a couple of smiles of familiarity coming through. That is, women are in a lot of ways raised to be more communally oriented. And there's something in the bias literature called agenic females tend to be less liked. So in a lot of ways for women, the sweet spot is competent and communal. And so women also tend to be more interpersonally attuned. So often will give, probably not unlike what you're doing in this moment, like you see a need and you and your colleagues at the JCC are stepping up with a massive amount of generosity to try to serve the needs of the world. And that impulse for women has been inculcated in different ways than it has for men. And men more often, because of the primary breadwinner assumption, it is easier for them to ask, advocate, and push for finance. But these, again, are part of the reason this slide is so important to me, is that the good thing about the research is we're able to distill what are the skills we need to teach women. That for folks who are my age, if I had known these skills when I was 25, I would have had more joy, less stress, and more cash.
All good.
Yeah.
Bring it on. Let's do it.
Okay. So skill number 1 is sort of know the enemy. and because there's so much bias in the world, right? Like years ago, we were working with finance team, and it's the woman who was the CFO of the organization felt a tremendous amount of guilt because she was in a multi-ethnic family. And so she was trying to make her in-laws sweet potato recipes and kugel from her family. And she couldn't figure, she didn't have time to do that many potatoes. And so she subcontracted them, right? Had somebody else make them. But she realized that she could give the caterer her china so that her family didn't watch her her mother-in-law didn't watch her take the recipe and put it into the container and judge her for not being female. She said, that's BS guilt for me. Like, I'm doing the best that I can to carry on the family traditions. And this is how I'm going to do it. So that she was able to recognize the guilt as unproductive and somebody else's story about what her life should be and what her behavior should be around the holidays. And other women have used the guilt very successfully, right? To calibrate what actually matters to them. Like not to travel on their kid's birthday, to protect time with their kids, because when they go to a, dance recital and they're checking their phone and they miss the recital, they feel terrible about it. Like that's really useful. So learning to differentiate what guilt helps you align with your own values versus what guilt is somebody else's expectation of you. And you can just shrug it off and say, yeah, no, I'm not doing that.
That's great. It's almost like what we talk about in embodied positive psychology, right? That I'm going to feel that sensation and use it as a cue to dictate a different behavior, not buy into that sensation, right? But use it as a signal for me to see that I'm at choice, right? And choice is a big part of positive psychology.
It is so essential. And for I don't want to go too far down this, but I think about, right, emotions are data, right? And sometimes they enrich us and sometimes they're old wounds, right? They're triggers and they're really about things that are not happening now. And sometimes they're about bias, right? So guilt may be one of those things for women. Anger, right? Resentment, fear. So learning, to your point about the mindfulness and the choice, is this good data that I'm getting? Is a skill for leader moms, for people hiring leader moms, for police officers, right? To begin to differentiate as my brain moves really fast, is it helpful information or is it poppycock, right? And bias, emotional triggers, thinking traps, jumping to conclusions, that kind of thing, where we draw conclusions with great confidence and we're entirely wrong. So building in that humility and the practice of mindfulness, I believe it may become the ultimate leadership skill in the next few years based on the volume of research that's coming out.
So are you saying, and I do want to get through the rest of your slides, but are you actually saying that you think that humility is going to be one of the ways that we, going forward, are going to attack both the gender bias and the racial bias?
I do. And so humility, there have always been paradoxes of leadership. And we define them as sort of own it, right? Assert like you're right, but also be willing to pivot. So confidence doesn't predict accuracy. It predicts things like stick-to-itiveness, right? But just because you think you're right doesn't mean you're right. And so consistently more effective leaders show that agility, right? They look for they'll come and say, here's the point of view, here's the thing that I think about what we should do with this business. And when somebody brings a data point that doesn't fit, they're quicker to listen to it. And so I think similarly, all of us have bias. Just because our brains can't process the volume of information. And so the quicker we can learn to recognize it and say, oh, wait, like I made a comment in a training not long ago. There was a Black male executive who was really mad about the presenter who preceded me. And he said something, and glibly I said to him, okay, bring it on. I'm not afraid of you. Right. And very quickly I said, wait, I need a do-over. Because the association of Black men with threat and fear is it's a massive mistake on my part to stumble into that. And I said, will you give me a do-over? Because if I were more conscious and mindful in this moment, what I would have said is, I'm not afraid of your anger. And he graciously gave it to me, but that, the ability to look at, my brain is going to, can we have it all? Like, no, that's bias, that's gender bias. Or my brain is going down the Black male threat, or Black male surprisingly articulate, or Latin male too passionate, right? Like those are pitfalls we fall into all the time. And so things like actually talking to people and even with how we relate to ourselves, like the idea of what's the story we're telling ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of. Those become really, really important skills in what financial services people call human capital management.
This is fascinating. Thank you so much for taking a little detour there, and because I think it's very relevant, and it also talks to the leadership and where we're going, and possibly the role that positive psychology can play, because this is a time, a very tenuous time, where people are so much about leadership is about, well, an old way of doing it is that you can't do it wrong, you can't make mistakes, and we're just not in that place anymore. We have to be able to shift and pivot quickly. So I'm really relating to what you're saying in terms of humility being a sort of foundation for giving us that agility to be able to be suspicious of our brain. And I love that you keep talking about the brain, like it's understanding our human nature, understanding the wiring, that I haven't heard anyone talk about that in this particular way. So let's see what you've got here at Misery and Mess Makers.
This is, to me, these are the enemies, right? Like anyone who is or knows a working mother will tell you that when we get into superhero mode, our brains get these massive hits of dopamine that say we're amazing, because we are resentfully, doing a call while dropping off lunch, while, sending something somewhere. And we are simultaneously massively resentful and also feeling superior, right? So it's a real kind of like a siren. It lures us in. And where positive psychology comes in, whether it's martyring yourself, like I'll suffer so you don't have to, right? I'll work all day and then I'll do my laundry and make sure the house is perfect. And it's such a temptress, these different things. And one of the beautiful things about positive psychology is it's be amazing and permission to be human, right? Maria Serwat's phrase around permission to be magnificent and also permission to be human from Tal Ben-Shahar, that these things, if we can recognize them, we can outsmart them, and replace them with something more sustainable. And this is, it's when you do something, right, as a researcher, often you're spending all this time and you boil things down. And this represents this massive synthesis of all the stuff that leader moms have told us. And we did a pilot with 1,200 people, and the factors hold weight from a psychometric perspective. It's really spectacular. But these things are learnable leader behaviors. And as we looked at the leader mom model, we realized this is actually what we want all leaders to do. And that leadership isn't about being individually exceptional. It's about engaging a team to perform over time to get sustainable results. And so these are the four things. What the positive psychology side of me, this little circle in the middle that says enjoy it, is made up of measures of well-being, ill-being, and work-life effectiveness, work-life mojo. And for the women in our panel, we don't need to ask them if they're performing, right? Like that's an assumption. It's the experience of the performance that we're interested in. Can you perform and not kill yourself? So depending on where you want to take the conversation, what I thought I might do is offer just one or two things for each of these that are things that women that we can do for ourselves, and also something that a manager could do. How does that feel?
Sounds great.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to start with adding value. And in the chat, could you maybe give me an example of prioritization practices that you have? Like, how good do you think you are at prioritizing? What works for you to do it? Because this thing, it's kind of like strength deployment in positive psychology. Everybody thinks they do it. But one of the women in our panel said, I am a ninja prioritizer. Right. So these women are exceptional. So I'd just like to get a sense of how folks on the chat do that.
I make lists, but don't feel I'm particularly good at prioritizing. Deadlines help.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. So most of us make lists, and sometimes we revisit them, and sometimes we don't. Right. So this notion of what actually matters to me. If there were a single practice that leader moms would tell you to come back to, it is this. They will do things like, I'm going to just pull up a paper and read you a couple quotes. I go through my day asking, will this make a difference? If the answer is no, it goes on the back burner. I have too many balls in the air to sweat the details. Another woman who said, I ask myself questions like, how much will this matter 3 months, 1 year, or 3 years from now as a filter? Another woman says, I ask myself, is there anyone on my team who can reasonably do this job? And if so, I hand it off. Another one says, when prioritizing at home, I focus on lifelong impact. Will this affect my child's or my own lifelong learning, health, or well-being? If not, it goes on the later list. Eventually the house gets cleaned. The other one that I loved is somebody said, what will my family remember? And so can I do that? A lot of people at work will be asked, can I do that? Can I help you? Or like, can you help with this? Or should I help with that? Those are not good prioritization questions, because mostly for competent, practiced adults, the answer is always going to be yes. The other thing that leader moms do is get very, very, very clear about what's going to be additive to the business. So they look at what they do and determine, is this thing that I'm spending my time on one of the big rocks that we need to move to advance the business? And what's extraordinary about focusing on value is it's not always hard to execute high value things, right? Like if you are very well trained in something, if you are focused on it, if it is meaningful to you, you often can deliver value in your area of expertise fairly quickly. And so this notion of being diligently focused on what actually matters is really, really helpful. So we've seen leader moms prioritize end of day, middle day, like that they will have disciplined practices to the habit piece. And the piece around family prioritization, and again, I'm a little embarrassed that this was rocket science to me, but it was when the data came back. My kids were younger and I felt like I needed to be anywhere. And one of the women in the panel said, ask your family what matters to them. And I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. So I thought I was supposed to be at soccer, jazz, and something else. And I asked my daughter, where do you want me to be? And she said, you do not have to go to the games in Glastonbury. I want you to come to the games at our school, because Glastonbury is going to destroy us anyway. And I'm just as soon you not witness that. And so it freed up 6 hours of stuff I thought I was going to be doing at night. But it was very clear what was important to her. And that simple practice of finding out what the family cares about and creating space for what's important to your family, like literally creating moments that matter, become really important. And then when you know what your yes is, the no becomes so much easier. And engaging the team right? Don't do for a kid in your house what they can do for themselves. Um, those sorts of things create capacity in your family or with your direct reports, and prevent you from falling into the exhausted martyr Wonder Woman pit.
Wonderful. It's like accessing your why, right?
Yeah,
Why am I doing this? And then also not doing it alone, really engaging with, we talk about in positive psychology, the and, right? The
mm-hmm.
pond and the swamp. But there's also that wonderful word with. So I'm going to be in relationship with you. I'm going to check in with you. And there's humility again. I'm going to not assume that I know what's best, that I have all the answers in my head. I'm going to actually talk with you and say, wait a second, what are our priorities? What are your priorities? What really matters to you?
And that conversation of with is, to me, fundamental to leadership. Like the individual contributor scaling who thinks my job is to be amazing is, I think, where a lot of the dysfunction of leadership comes from. Like, I need to look perfect and stellar and in command. No, it's like your job is to figure out how to get the best, to show up at your best and bring out the best of the people around you. And on the human side, to acknowledge that you actually do need to eat and sleep and move your body. And so even if you think you are spectacular and can work all the time, that some reality checking about what it means to be human and to function at a reasonable level, I think, is required.
Great. We have about 10 minutes left or so. I just want to let you know.
So advance your value is something that when I reference, women tend to under communicate what we do well, what our contributions are. If a woman, if you come to yourself, right, I'm not doing enough, or a woman on your team comes to you and says, I'm not doing enough, just ask them what they have actually done so far that day, right? So this notion of helping people just dwell for a minute in the things that they are contributing. And if, to the point about pay equity, if leader moms were more diligent about tracking where their contributions are and sharing those, it would be so much easier to ask for what you need. But because so many of us live into that I'm not doing enough question, we lose sight of what we actually do contribute and of the like the tangible cash value of those things. And then and I'm not saying the pay gap is entirely that, but I do believe it's part of it. This piece around valuing yourself, right? I know you all have talked a fair amount about self-care in this moment in time. These are the things that are on our self-assessment for our members. And actually working on things that matter to you, right? To Susan Peppercorn's session with you on job crafting. Again, for managers of leader moms, make sure the work is more compelling than the kid. One of the mistakes that we see is this thing that's called benevolent sexism. A woman in our panel named Chris Torres told us a story about her. She was pregnant and she threw up twice on the way to work and got to work and was going to work on something that was incredibly important to her. And her boss, with the kindest intentions, had taken her off that project because he assumed she would be tired. But that project was actually her raison d'etre. And so in this beautiful attempt to be kind, he actually took it away. So, and had the exact opposite impact. So this notion of asking what work is meaningful to you, how are you taking care of yourself, and giving women permission to put boundaries in place becomes very important. Like, don't talk to people during bath time. Like, make it, those things are all very common in our high performers. The share the load piece we talked about, but I also think it's important to look at gratitude here. Like, who's actually helping you, and to allow that gratitude is a phenomenal antidote. And the last thing I want to touch is just a handful of things that bosses can do, right? Ask, amplify voice, focus on the results, not how they get done. A lot of these assumptions around FaceTime or early morning meetings or late time things are kind of unnecessary and represent privilege. So the idea of checking some of those and being supportive of flexibility, humanity, a broader being engaged in life beyond work tends to be very good for everybody. So resource-wise, these are some of the ways that folks can follow us, the @LeaderMom official. I'm going to put my email out there because in the COVID-19, this is my personal email. If anybody has questions or sees a young leader mom or at any stage of the career really struggling, we're happy to provide a coaching consult to those folks just to be of service. One of the things that we might ask you to do, if you see women who you believe meet the criteria of the panel, high performers, highly engaged, admired as parents, please nominate them. Because we'll be getting ready for the next study, I think in the fall. And our goal is to grow that as much as possible. I really believe if we all light up here, we can scare away the dark of this, and we can make this story more possible and really bend history in this moment. And toward that end, we are inspired by the generosity of the JCC. We decided we need to show up. And so we're making our Leader Mom membership, which is normally $120, available free. And for you all, you can use this code and share this code, Bend History. And we will do our best to serve and develop the leader moms you love and the bosses they have. So,
Catherine, that's amazing. Let me just let's unshare your screen so I can see you and have a few moments just to talk with you about this. It's really a generous offer, and I just feel like this is such an important conversation, and I'd love for you to talk about the relationship of where we are right now with, as you said, you could kind of substitute the women with, Black Lives Matter or whatever in terms of the inequity. But how do we start managing our bias?
So I actually believe mindfulness is probably the single most important tool. Because this notion of metacognition, right? That instead of automatically reacting to the autopilot responses that our brain gives us, like our brain is processing millions of pieces of information as quickly as it can based on what it knows. But by practicing mindfulness, we learn to watch, oh, I'm feeling triggered or I'm thinking this, and not to so deeply associate with it. So that notion of training your brain to watch what it thinks and feels really enables us to access executive function. The other piece is to normalize it, right? Like I've spent most of my career in some way in the D&I space and diversity and inclusion space. And it is still something that when I'm tired, it'll trip me up. And so making it normal, right? Like everybody gets triggered and annoyed and has regrettable instances emotionally, right? Like, am I the only person who yells at my kids and goes, if you don't eat that broccoli, I'm never cooking for you again, or we're not going on vacation if you won't pick up your stuff, right? Like we do those things as humans, and that's normal. And similarly, I think creating space for bias to be a normal thing takes some of the shame out of it and makes learning easier. And so if we can do it with gender and begin to look at the assumptions that we have on areas that are important to us, we'll be able to do it in other areas as well.
You have said that the brain is lazy. And how do you, when you say that, and you say that, oh, I tend to do that when I'm tired, can you talk more about that actually taking care of ourselves? I've heard one author say stress makes us stupid.
Yeah.
And I think it's similar to what you're talking about, isn't it?
It is. So here's an example, right? Like, so if all of us probably went to elementary school and high school, and some of us probably took calculus, but if I asked you to do math in your head that says 24 times 17, right? So 24 times 17 is what, right? Okay.
I have no idea.
Okay, so theoretically,
I'm going to look on my calculator.
Yeah, we all want to look on the calculator. Some people in the room probably are doing the math, right? They're probably, if there's anybody doing the math, please drop us a note. They may be math teachers. They may be very well trained in that thing. So for them, it's a more automatic, fun thing. Some people will go 20 times 20 and round to it. Um, but most of us give up because these kinds of problems take glucose, like our pupils dilate, our brain slows down, and things like, how do I do it all is like the equivalent of 2016 times whatever. And it's not that. It's really, how do I get to daycare to pick up my kid, or what would be a reasonable meal to feed people in a couple hours, right? It's so our brains go to these questions that seem bigger or smaller, very automatically without conscious consideration. Um, and again, it makes sense because that's how we're wired. Um, so to be more mindful of that, I think, is an important thing.
I wanted to get to a few questions in the chat. What about a woman entering workforce after 40 years of multi-generational care without the infrastructure?
So re-entering the workforce out of being out,
Yeah.
yeah, yay, right? I just think yay. My first piece of advice would be notice what you did do, right? So things like volunteering, remove that, think of that as the V word, right? And just think about what you did and what you contributed, or parenting, the skills that you have on coordinating multiple schedules, managing a budget, all of these different things. Those skills are transferable. And often women who have left the workforce come back one or two levels below where they left, sometimes lower, because the world has passed them by. But in our work, what we often see is those women advance faster. And so, get in there, normal transition, learn what's going to make you successful in the job, look at the strengths that you have to bring to it, develop a plan to accelerate your learning at work, and your wisdom that you have from your life. Motherhood makes, in our panel, 80 something percent of our panelists say motherhood makes them more effective as a leader. So carry that knowledge into your new job.
Beautiful. And then finally, what about that whole idea of women not being willing to ask for a raise, or being satisfied with what they get, or keeping their hand down? Lisa Branda says, Sally Crenshaw says, keep your head up. Women also keep their heads down when a man comes in to ask for a raise. He is never happy with what they give him, but a woman's like, oh, thank you so much. Is there some truth to that?
There is an annoying amount of truth to that. One of the things that I watch women do in coaching is they'll say I could ask for a raise, but they will they'll build the argument for the other person, right? Like they're probably not going to do it because, and I'm like, listen, that's not your job now. Your job now in salary negotiations is to represent yourself, and even if you think of, you have to think about, I'm doing this ask on behalf of all of the women behind me and who came before me. That's great. But so there's two other tangible things. One is have a disciplined practice during your week, like once a week before you close out your week on Friday, document what you accomplished that week. Because the more attention you pay to the value that you actually bring, the easier it will be to ask for cash to compensate you for that value. And then second, ask other people that you work with to identify what is valuable about what you do. If you have a hard time doing it, Megan, I know, referenced on one of the Lunch and Learns the best reflected self exercise, but asking other people, what am I doing that's valuable? And what else can I do that's valuable is often a massive thing, so that you can bring other people's feedback for your benefit in your performance reviews.
Wow. Thank you so much. This has been such a rich hour of, investigating both the gender gap and with women, but also, some positive solutions or approaches, not solutions, but approaches of how to begin to look at bias and racial bias and where we might begin. I thank you so much for joining us. I'm curious what your top strength is.
Mine, love of learning.
Oh, of course, of course. And I just want to remind everybody that our Lunch and Learn tomorrow is another topic on leadership, improving leadership, and living in an interactive discussion with Cindy Stack. So we're looking forward to that. It's been a really wonderful week focused on career, focused on, how can we renew ourselves and also remake ourselves at this time of COVID. I find that the climate is moving quickly, that we have to have great agility. And what I hear you saying, Catherine, is in addition to that, we have to be both mindful and we have to consider the whole, right? We won't want to fall into that trap of overworking, overdoing, being perfect. In fact, we actually want to do what I was talking with Michael Camber, who is from TV Denmark, have a fundraiser and make sure we're having fun. All right, so everybody, I hope you have an incredible day. Catherine, thank you so much.
Thank
We'll
you,
see you
Catherine.
tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.